Okay, what I want to do is show you a way to do a little bit of painting on your car, paint repair, on the cheap, as they say. Um, and this is really geared to people that just don't have very much money to work with. Uh, as of course, it's always best if you can afford it, take your car to a nice professional shop and have them paint it and pay them. But a lot of us, just don't have the money to do that. And this is a fairly common problem. Move some stuff out of the way here. This is a 1994 Dodge Dakota. And Dodges, especially in these years, were kind of notorious for the clear coat peeling. Now you can see an area like this where it's still shiny, the clear coat's still on there, and the paint. Here, these areas, first the clear coat peeled off, and then over time the paint wore and peeled off, and so it's down to the primer. That's this gray is the primer. And another thing on this truck, I bought it in Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't know where it said it's set for a year. And places on the hood here, it's almost like some sort of tree residue, sap or something. Now I've already cleaned it off with a spray bottle of mean green and a scrubby sponge. One thing you need to do if you're going to undertake to paint your car or whatever, you need it as smooth as you can get it. And so in that, if nothing else, it has to be clean first. And then there's enough roughness left on this from that residue or whatever it was. The whole hood's going to have to be sanded lightly just to get it down to where it's smooth again. Now places like this where you can see it shiny, I'll just barely hit that with the sandpaper a little bit. So this won't take much work. This the whole center area up here and these areas will take a little bit of work. If I can show you the top of the truck, from about here over, there was a spot about this big as this gray area. It was just solid rust. And then another area about that size farther toward the back on the top, it was just solid rust. And for that, you could maybe do that by hand, but it would take a lot of elbow grease to ever get that much rust off. For that, I used a dual action sander, and you can rent one of those cheap. But for right now, we're just going to deal with something like this hood that's not in too bad a shape, just the clear coat and some of the paint missing, and see what we can do with this. And to do this, I'm going to use first 60 grit sandpaper. Now I'll show you, these are the two that I'm going to use. You can see, I hope you can read this. 60 grit, and this is 150 grit. The higher the number, the smoother the sandpaper is. If you can see the difference, I'm sure you can see the difference in these. This one is 60 grit, and that one is 150. Now that one's got a lot of primer in it, but you can still see that it's a lot finer than this. You want to be a little careful with this. You know, you don't, your areas where there's good paint, you don't want to get too heavy with this in those areas. But just to prepare the hood, mainly this is all you're going to need, is maybe 60 grit and 150. And if you go to a body shop, they're probably going to tell you that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I don't. I'll show you the hood of my truck. Pardon the leaf. And there's a little bit of residue up there, and I may add some more clear coat to the top of the cab. But the cab was way bad. It took 4 cans of paint, probably a can and a half of primer, and I did only use 1 can of clear coat on the top. And I may use some more clear coat. You can see it's just got a little bit of gloss to it. The clear coat is mainly to protect the paint. How good of a job you do and how much of everything you put on there is really just up to you. It just really depends on what it takes to please you. And a job like this, if you just want your car to look a little bit better, then you can do this fairly cheap. On the top, I probably spent, I don't know, maybe around $45 in material. The 4 cans of paint, Duplicolored paint, it's made to match Dodge color. The 4 cans of paint cost me about $30. And a little bit of sandpaper, the primer, and the clear coat, add it all together. I'm somewhere less than $50 to do the top. And considering how big the rust area was up there and everything, you know, that's not too bad. This hood, and if you have a vehicle that's like this, it'd be about the same. You might could get away with doing this hood for as little as maybe 20 bucks. It depends partly on what kind of paint you're going to use. Most of your vehicles, you go to Advance Auto Parts or another one here in Kentucky that carries Duplicolored paint is O'Reilly Auto Parts. Sometimes Napa carries it, but it's made to match the factory color, and that makes a lot of difference, but it's more expensive. So you can take all that into consideration, and if you can't afford to do the color, you can pick a color that matches whatever color your car is and do it in some other color or whatever. Be creative, you know. You're trying to save money. Figure out something that pleases you and do what pleases you. And otherwise, you just take it to the body shop. This hood would probably, I'd expect to pay a body shop between $300 to $500, $300 to $500 just to do this hood. Depends on where you go, how good they are, and the material they use. It just depends. But that gives you maybe some idea of how much money you can save. So now, doing the sanding, these areas you can see with the little bit of sun I've got shining through my trees. All these areas, I'm going to bring this camera a little closer for a minute. all these areas where you can see the edge of the paint, that has to be, the term is feathered. I'll show you after I get a spot done. I'll show you what it needs to look like. But it needs to be feathered and smoothed out real good. And the way we're doing this, it just takes a little bit of work. We'll see how much it's going to take. If you want to spend, I don't know, I don't remember how much this little sanding block was, but this is made to hold your sandpaper. Cost a few dollars, but a lot of people would not want to have to deal with taking the sandpaper in and out of the thing. It's got teeth that hold the sandpaper. That's what punches these holes. This, just to say, this is, I think this is 1000 grit. This is what you use after you've painted, and you need, you maybe have a little bit of roughness in your paint, and you need to go over it a little bit and then put another coat of paint on, or even on the primer. If you want to sand your primer down for some reason, you can get grit on it. You can see I'm in the trees here. Doing that cab, it's almost impossible for me to keep everything off of it because I didn't have anything to park it under. My hood, when I get ready to do it, I'm going to stretch a tarp out over from the top and bring a tarp out and fasten it to the trees or something to keep stuff from falling on the hood. I'm going to be a little more particular with the hood because you look down on it. It's a little harder unless you're 6'6" to look down on that cab. So that in mind, that's what you'd use this sandpaper for, and I'll probably end up using a little bit of it, but it may not be necessary. And for a lot of you, if you're, you know, depending on how cheap you're trying to do it and how much physical effort you're willing to put in it, you may not need this at all. But now this block, and it won't work with these. It's not long enough. This sandpaper is not long enough. But this block, you know, for if you buy the other types of sandpaper, the longer and narrower, like the one I took out of it, you can buy that, or you can buy the full 8 by 11 sheets and cut them with scissors to fit this and save even a little more money. But if you don't want to do this, and I tell you, you can just take a piece of the sandpaper and you can do it in your hand. You can use it in your hand. And that will work. Can you see this green powder? Can you see that? That's what I took off just there. But now, it may be very tiring on your hand to try to hold a piece of sandpaper and do that. It would be for me if I did it very long. You know, I don't want to do it that way very long. But just to say, you can do it that way. Now, to make it a little easier, there's any number of things probably you can use. If you happen to have one of those, what do they call them at the swimming pools? Those long noodles or whatever it is. It's just a long foam thing that you beat each other in the pool with. if you had one of those that was tore up or something, and you could cut off a piece about that long, that would work real good because it's got a rounded shape. But if not, something like a washcloth or a pair of tube socks tucked inside each other so that it just gives a shape. But you take anything like that and wrap it around washcloth or whatever, and this gives you a little something more to hold on to, like that. And that's a lot easier on your hand. Now I'm going to work on this just a little bit here. There can be places where you may not need to paint at all. And what I want to show you on here, I'm going to go ahead and lightly sand this and probably paint all of that too. Just because of the I don't know how well you can see this, but there are some little, real small little specks there where rocks or something had hit, and just little bitty specks of paint missing. You can see some a little bit bigger, like there. Sorry if I'm moving this camera too much. There's a little spot. But a few places like that, again, it depends on how good a job you want to do. But just to tell you, if you were here and looking at this, you might think that that looks good enough to paint. But anything, you may not be able to hardly feel it. But as soon as you spray some paint on there, every little flaw in there is just going to jump out. So that's why I say it's important to get your surface as smooth as you can, because it's not very forgiving. You can get scratch filler primer, which will do a fair job of filling in a little bit in rough spots. But the best thing you can do is get this as smooth as you can get it. And I think one of the things I'm going to have to do before I go too much farther, I'm going to tape off my fender here, because I don't want to get over onto this. Even though there's a little marring here, if I had to say this is from somebody having the hood open and working on the engine, and their belt buckle or something scuffed this, if I had to guess. So I'm going to tape this off. I don't know if you can see all that dust or not. You can see it on my hand. I'm going to turn the camera off for a minute. I need to do this in 15-minute segments anyway. That uploads to YouTube best that way. So I'm going to shut the camera off for a minute and get my masking tape and get it on here, and then we'll do some more.